far as I can see, they appear to be making a claim of, and this is one of the things, measuring the R value, which is very interesting. I don't know if you've seen it or analysed it, anyone. It's quite an interesting claim, littered with errors, as you'll see in assumptions. They're basically deriving R, and they proudly announce it as 6499.7 kilometres, a 2% error on the known value. Yeah, it's 2% off of the accepted value. There is no accepted value because the accepted value was never measured. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, you can't be 2% off a total nonsensical bullshittery.
Yeah, well, how do they get to within 2% of the non-existent established R value that they haven't got? What are they claiming?
I think they're claiming they've got R. That's the point.
I've got that bit. How are they claiming to have derived it?
What they did, I know it's noisy. What they did was Wolfie and a other lad, Wally. They both looked at geocentric satellites at the same time, and they both made 2 0-degree horizontals, but one of those horizontals is different from the other horizontals. It's basically 2 kind of dodgy chords, and they tilted one of them, and then they brought zeniths to the center of it.
You're talking about Wolfie 6020?
Yeah, it wasn't him. It was him and another guy called.
Oh, God. Wolfie 6020 is a Wally. That boy is scary stupid. He's dumber than Bob, the pseudoscience fallacy guy, Bob Rooney. Yeah. I haven't heard from Wolf. Does Wolfie still have a channel? I don't see him pop up anywhere. And after 2016, where I drug him and all his subscribers around his channel by the short hairs, there's some really stupid people over there. And Wolfie 6020, you're the king. You're so illogical. I'm telling you. I wish I would have wrote down all that stuff and then stored it somewhere to expose you. But that's okay. Just come on out. Come on out, and I'll show you in less than 15 seconds. You clown. We can get away from him. What's the case, though? There is no case.
Well, it's quite silly, the case.
You say it starts with geo what now?
This is where I attacked it too. First thought. Well, one of the things I attacked it with. Geocentric satellites that they claim to be viewing 35,000 miles a year, 35,000 kilometers away. 2 of them are in 2 different parts of Australia. They're viewing them with telescopes that have 0-degree horizontal baselines, these telescopes. They're both viewing these things that they're claiming are in a sky vacuum and 35,000 kilometers away at the same time, one in Dubbo, Australia, and one in Sydney, Australia. And somehow one of their 0 degrees horizontal is tilted. And now that means that they're bringing their zeniths down to the center of the globe, and then they're putting, it's like 2 kind of dodgy chords, and then they're putting an arc over the chord.
It uses a sphere to verify the sphere within 2% of what they presuppose, basically.
What they're doing is, between these 2 points, these 300 kilometres almost, between Dubbo and Sydney, measuring the angle to, like say, a geostationary satellite. And that is important. Pick it apart later. They're measuring the angle to this thing and then presupposing that they're on a ball, and using the known distance between the 2 observation points and the difference between their angles. And there's a little bit of chicanery there to try and increase that a little bit, which I've not got a problem with, to be honest. And then use that angle to, as Brian says, to then calculate the R value. Basically, they're going to kind of assign the angular difference with the known distance a circumferential rate using trigonometry, which is kind of backwards because they don't do it properly.
Why?
But they use the law of they use the law of sines to take it back to the center of a presupposed ball to calculate what the R value would be based on the assumption that the angular change in the two positions is reflective of rotation of a ball Earth. It works mathematically. I've spent the afternoon going through it. What they do.
If you assume a ball Earth.
Yes, but exactly. It's littered with not only assumption error, but also I think lots of other critical errors which relate to the use of a sextant.
I'm sorry. They using triangles?
Right. That was going to be my next question. Where did they get this straight line to get the angle that they measured? Correct me if I'm wrong. I recognise this picture. Wasn't this put right at the beginning of your video, Mitch, where you actually have the guy saying, "Well, yeah, I'll have to assume a sphere." Correct me if I'm wrong.
Hey, Mitchell, what you're going to say about this? You're presuming R. Well, fair cop, I am kind of presuming R in this case. But Mitchell, did you know that I could take multiple measurements of this given satellite from multiple locations and work backwards and calculate R? I bet you didn't realise you could do that. So that is how easy it would be to do. And the only assumption that would be required would be that the height of the satellite is remaining constant.
Yeah, exactly. This is coming from someone that I've called out. He claims to have measured the radius of the Earth, and I called him out on saying, you've got the R in the picture to begin with. You're already presupposing you're doing that measurement, that curved measurement, that 281 kilometers. You've already put that on a globe. You're already begging the question, and that's the issue that I've taken with this bloke named Wally. I've said, all you're doing is begging the question. This picture up on screen at the moment, that's the first rendition of this argument of the R value. Yeah, it's up on the live stream right now. So this is the second rendition now. Like after I've called them out for begging the question, putting that curved line on a globe. This is what he's come up with now. So he's still got the lines to the presupposed spherical Earth, but he hasn't got the spherical Earth anymore. He's got the horizontal lines. And this is the second rendition of what he's trying to prove. The radius value, the R value, because I'm saying you can't prove the radius value without first presupposing that it's on a ball, presupposing you've got the R value to begin with. He's done this with two, he calls them uber sextants. And that just, the argument falls over from there, because if you are claiming that you are using something like an angle measuring device, they're using telescopes in this instance, you've got a flat baseline. And that's exactly what they're showing. I forced them to show that you have to have that flat baseline, the horizontal line. And now their argument is that they have two differing elevation angles for their two different horizontal lines here.
They're clowns!
This took me a while to work through this, Mitchell. There's a bit of bullshittery and subterfuge, sleight of hand, shall we say. So, see, they've brought this frame shift correction stuff in, which does make sense because they're viewing a geostationary satellite, apparently.
Oh, they are?
From two different locations that aren't quite in alignment. So this bit makes sense, and I can understand how they get to it. But the number you've got, look, is the 2.4149, which is the difference in the angle between the two things. And they seem to then draw this blue line, Mitchell, as if this to this little arrow is what they're doing. If you read here, look, isosceles triangle, base of 281.91 kilometers, angle of 25979. Here, this is the line that's the base of the isosceles triangle, this sagitta, in effect, that they're creating between Dubbo and Sydney. Okay, so which means technically this is incorrect, as Brian would attest, because it's the curved surface that's 281.91, not the sagitta line. But anyway, point is the triangle, this is the base. The apex of the triangle is the center of the Earth. So that's none of this little shenanigans here is what they used the calculations for in the previous thing. So why they've done this is to try and go over that ridiculum that they pretended they've got these two horizontal lines, and they're making them horizontal because they're doing the angle adjustment, which is supposedly the amount of rotation, which is why they then take that angle and stick it at the center of the Earth, make it the amount of rotation, which will then be expressed. This is how they're going to calculate R, fundamentally. You see, that the relationship between the circumferential distance and the angle that the amount of distance creates on a sphere. That's what the sine calculations they do on the previous ones is doing. You see, so yeah, this is a bit naughty. Took me a while. It's implying stuff's going off here and calculating here. It isn't. All they're saying here is they're turning what, because you've got two tangents basically. So they're turning this tangent, and they're saying they're having to turn it 2.59 degrees to create this triangle that they've taken off a flat surface. All it's farcical, but yeah, they're then taking it back and applying that angle to be the angle from the centre of the Earth between Dubbo and Sydney, and that's how they then backwork it.
This requires that they beg the question twice.
Yeah.
To the same conclusion.
Exactly. They're still begging the question. Wally's going to see this. Wally, you're still begging the question, mate. You can't derive R without first begging the question. You've got R to derive.
Right. The triangle to the centre of a presupposed what now?
Yep.
I've got a better kick in the nuts as well yet. Because I want them to have a geostationary satellite.
I was going to bring Brian back in on this. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, no, let Brian explain it, because he knows details better than me. This is just the numbers, the consequence of it being a geostationary satellite.
Well, basically, they made 2 0 degrees horizontals, 2 absolute horizontals for their telescopes, and then they claimed one of those horizontals wasn't horizontal, and that's the basics of it. There's no geometric measurement of the Earth. They're claiming to see things that would be too small to see if they existed, which they can't. So it's nowhere like. I mean, it's just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and that's what I said to him. You know, he's after sending me some messages back. I haven't read them yet, but it's not a measurement of anything. It's pre-assuming of something, and they tilted. How can you have two? As I said to him, how can you have 2 0 degrees horizontals on a globe? You can't even have one. On a globe, Wolfie would be looking up because the stars were off to the west. So Wolfie, where they were looking to, was to the west. So Wolfie would be looking up, and Wally, the other lad, would be looking down. Do you know what I mean? Because 4.5 miles of curvature between the two of them. You know, it's complete and utter nonsense in their world. That is total and utter nonsense. You know. I don't know where they're going. Wally admitted that there was an elevation difference between the two places, but I don't see how an elevation difference can take something that was supposedly 0 degrees horizontal and make it less than 0 degrees horizontal, make it a straight slope. How did they get a slope? No, did it? They have to make it up as they go along.
I think Mitch dealt with this perfectly. In other words, we get this on debate occasionally when we point out that they're just begging the question when they start by assuming that they're on a sphere. I'll normally literally beg us. Let them beg the question. Oh, just let me beg. I've got to beg the question a little bit. Well, in the disclaimer that Mitch cut out, I was like, well, you might say I'd have to assume a sphere to have my triangle go to the centre of a sphere that I'm going to get to within 2% of. Well, yeah, I have got to beg the question. So now watch me beg the question. Like, what the hell? Yeah, you're using a logical fallacy. You know you're using a logical fallacy. You're going to disclaim that you're using a logical fallacy. Then it's okay to go forth with the logical fallacy. No, you bunch of dicks.
I can't. I'm not even going to comment on it, man, because it's such a farce. There's more than, well, there's 2 begging the question fallacies, but there's a lot more, mathematically speaking. Clowns.
But this was just my last point. And when we're talking about use of the sextant, and one of the things they'll use to justify on the use of a ball is basically you put the stars out to infinity. So they're so far away that the distance you are on the Earth between each point has no bearing on the angular change. The only bearing on angular change is the amount of curvature you experience over that distance. The actual distance itself doesn't play a role in their calculations. Which is, that's what
that's what I thought Brian was going to cover, actually.
That's fine if you're going to argue stars and celestial navigation with stars. But what they've done in this setup of these observations is not use stars. They've used, as they proudly state, geostationary satellites.
That's another one.
Yeah. But, I mean, fundamentally, look, those things are up there. They filmed them. So wherever they are, how high they are, whatever, I don't want to get into, I'll quote their numbers. But we're no longer dealing with something intangible. Technically, by their claim, something that is definitely tangible and has a known distance. And I think Brian alluded to it. I took the figure 36,000 kilometers, Brian. It's something like 35.7 or something. But I took that. And you remember Al-Biruni? And you know, before Uncle Bubby goes up to the mountain to measure his dip angle, he assumes a flat plane and takes two angles, theta 1 and theta 2, that he knows the distance. Doesn't know how far he is from the base of the mountain, the GP of the satellite, but he does know the two angles. Now, I've only done a bit of geeky maths, but because this is no longer an apparent position and off to infinity, distance does have an effect. And if we use Uncle Bubby's calculations, so if you imagine, look, Dubbo to Sydney, if you took the angles, you could calculate how far it is away, and vice versa. Yeah. And in doing so, that has an application in terms of that calculation, has an impact that the angular change, because it's a physical object at 36,000 kilometers altitude, it's physically there. You can do, well, within that mathematics, the distance you travel changes the angle. It's only very, very, very slight because it's so far away. It does change the angle. Now, this angle they don't compensate for in their mathematics here. You'll see that they just take this angle, try and beef it up a little bit, because they're trying to get it to about 2.5 or something like that. The kind of consequences, if you do the calculation using Uncle Bubby's maths, yeah? So do you know the one I'm talking about, where you've got the two angles and we're trying to ascertain the height of the mountain?
Yes.
So if we use, if we use that same principle, but we know the height of the mountain, then we can actually calculate what the angular change should be from, if we know it at position A, what it should be at position B. And we must compensate for that because it's physical. And that turns out to be just virtually 0.6 of a degree, which, as you can see, is a quarter of their assumed figure that they then run with. I just kind of wanted to point that out, that I think it's quite significant, because the apologetics are off to infinity, but this isn't off to infinity. Their maths is off to infinity, but it isn't, and it means a 25% variance in their figure already.
Yep.
Don't know what that does to the R value. I've not calculated that, but there you go.
That was the thing that I thought Brian was going to cover when I said, geostationary, eh? Because when they move the angle that you're actually measuring, which is your point with the Al-Biruni frame one, I'm not looking at the live stream, but whichever one shows him measuring the height of the mountain on a flat plane, and then uses that to then make a justification of a presupposed R. Well, that's their first begging the question fallacy. But when they do it the second time, that is to say they move the angle from the actual angle that they're measuring and they show in that Muppet Vision view that I did have a look at a second ago, and they move the angle down to the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth, they have to put the stars at an infinite distance to stop the balls up that will occur if they're at a fixed distance. So they're just pushed off to infinity to stop that error. In this case, as soon as he said geostationary, I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. When you move your presupposed angle measurement to the center of a presupposed spherical Earth, you've got to have infinite stars. How much of a difference does that make to that tiny little angle that they're justifying between those two locations? You said it's a quarter of that value. That was the bit I was waiting for.
Yeah. I've posted the Uncle Bubby.
I just pulled it up.
You got it anyway.
I was already on it when you guys were talking, so I pulled Al-Biruni's method up there.
Yeah. So I kind of backworked that. So I had height as 36,000 kilometers, and 281 miles as the distance between the known angle of 34 degrees and what it would then be at
Let's see
a
what you
distance
got.
of 281 away, which was the calculated angle tan theta. So yeah, that worked out to be 33.313. When then you subtract that from the other one, it turned out to be 0.6.
I can just back Brian's point, which is to say that when you're taking that top of the triangle now with the other 2 points, the other point being at the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth, it doesn't match the arc length over the top of it. That chord length, they're deriving that, doesn't give you the same value when you've got the actual arc over the top, the curve of the spherical Earth they're assuming in the first place to get a centre of it. Well, that's suddenly missing. It's got a flat top to it, right, Brian? Further to that, the distance they're measuring is prone to a 25% or there or thereabouts, disclaimer, error on account of the fact that their measurements, I can't summarise your point. It took about 3 minutes to actually sum it up a minute ago, Adam, so maybe
The
5
measurements
minutes.
aren't subject to just rotation or effect of curvature, because what they're not measuring is stars, which are off into infinity in their model. They're measuring something that's a known distance away of 36,000 kilometers, of which that distance is, even as big as it is significantly small enough to have an impact on the angular measurement, even if you're assuming you're on a ball.
That's perfect. Therefore, at this point, full stop, we've debunked it for the initial premises, which was highlighted by Mitch in the first place. They need to beg the question and assume they're standing on a spherical surface to derive any of these nonsense chords that don't match the arc lengths and have a geostationary satellite utilization, when in fact, to beg the question in the first place, you must push the distance out to infinity for those stars, which you're not doing, giving you a 25% error. So it's a complete balls up. I mean, it's a complete sham. One more point. One more last point. They can't even measure the angle on a globe. To make any of these claims requires that they take two straight lines with the arm.
That's awesome. That's not to say don't stop trying. This is the second rendition. Do you want to go for a third rendition, Wally and co? It's giving us a lot of great content, because it's just showing the length that you're trying to go to measure or calculate the R value. It is not obtainable. But keep trying.
If you do keep trying and your starting point is to beg the question, don't waste my time with that shite. Obviously, Mitch is encouraging that. But if you're going to beg the question, you'll just get bitch slapped off your presupposed spherical Earth before you've even got past the first breath.
You know what? His intention was to come on your show and actually present this for the 3 Bitcoin.
Oh,
So Wally,
really?
I'd advise against that.
Oh, really? This is Wally. Wally, if you'd have come with this shite, you'd have been, quote, bitch slapped off your presupposed spherical Earth before you got past the first breath.
Once again,
think
I'm
he
not
claimed,
discouraging that.
Sorry, Mitch. I was going to say, Mitch, I think in your video, didn't he get up to claiming 9 Bitcoins with different ways, with it, let's say, within this of proving his ball?
Yeah, he's adding on some Bitcoins. He's got some other things in the video, but we don't need to go into that. The bottom line is they're desperately trying to show us that they have an R value. But in the first instance, they are begging R to begin with. In every single claim that they think they can measure the R value, they can calculate an R value, they just beg the question. That's what Nathan is highlighting right here. But once again, I'm not discouraging Wally. Please go to the Flat Earth debates and just see what happens. Try and claim the 3 Bitcoin that you think you're owed, and see what happens.
Just a little clarity to that. There isn't a case that you'll come to me for Bitcoin. I haven't got a pot to piss in, right? EITRH has offered with terms 2 Bitcoin, I believe it is, if you can present sphere Earth proof. However, there are terms, one of which is you've got to download the app, and there's a certain amount of consumption of things on the app. I can't remember the exact detail that you'd have to do and show that you've done in order for you to qualify to attempt to get the Bitcoin. Me, I'm just a gatekeeper. people come by me because Dave says, okay, go and run this by Flat Earth Debate Team and see what they've got to say about it. Now, in this case, because I've already seen it on your 5-minute summary of it, Mitch, I know that this wouldn't last 5 seconds on the debate because it starts with the assumption of the very thing it's trying to prove. That big round blue sphere that they showed with the triangle going to it, it didn't matter that it had the R value pasted on it because even Bob, the science guy, came and tried to get away with just having a big blue sphere without an R value labelled or noted in any way, shape or form. It doesn't change the fact that that big blue sphere in his picture is his assumption that this measurement's taking place on that big blue sphere he thinks he's standing on. In other words, the very thing he's trying to prove is assuming in the first instance, aka a begging the question fallacy. You don't get to do that on the debate, let alone spend bloody ages going through it thinking you're going to get Bitcoin at the end of it, when you're even disclaiming to your own audience and your opponent, in this case, Mitch, are you begging the question? You know you are. You're delusional if you think you're going to get money for DITRH for that. You're absolutely delusional, or what?
Well, if they're going to try and prove R, they can't be using elevation angles. Is that right, QE?
You got that right, brother.
What that means is they can't get two straight lines on a sphere Earth unless they assume it's flat, aka the Al-Biruni demonstration that was just shown by Adam. In order to acquire an angle, you need a flat baseline. You use the sextant to get an angle to anything ever, you're going to have to assume it's flat. Well, what is that referred to in this geometry? Well, it's the elevation angle. Elevation from a straight, flat baseline. Something that is never to be acquired on a sphere Earth. Ever.
It goes back to the Al-Biruni argument, isn't it? To get the height of the mountain, he had to assume that he had a flat baseline to measure the angles to the height of the mountain. That's exactly what they're doing. They're doing it. If they're claiming that they're doing it with an angle measuring device, they've got a flat baseline, and then after they've got the angles, they presuppose that they're on the globe. That is still begging the question. We're exposing this.
Have his moment on this. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, because I tried to do correct research on this before I go. So one of the things I did look at was the distance between Sydney and Dubbo. I'll tell you what, Mitch, that's the most Australian name, isn't it, for a place? Dubbo. Love it.
Dubbo.
It's like it should have been called like Dubbington or something. And they thought, well, we're Australian. What are we going to shorten it to? Probably just Dubbo. Let's just call it that anyway. But the distance between there and Sydney, okay, well, I've gone to a free map, and I don't know if you can verify this, but I think mathematically it's important, is it turns out to be 301.943 miles. It means you've got more angles to have to get to. As I showed you earlier, they tried to add a few in. It means you've got to get to 2.7 odd, which is harder to show that difference to make it match up to a ball. So what they have quoted is 281.91 kilometers. So all I've got is a website that's just gone, it's got distance as the crow flies and distance by land transport. So that would be another mathematical anomaly I'd see in there, that you can bend little numbers here and there, make big differences when they play out if you're trying to, we've done with previous distance stuff and horizon stuff. Little trims here and there can really help when you're trying to match up to curvature. So I would also question how they validate that distance unless they knew as the crow flies between the exact two sites, and then that makes sense. So that was all.
I'll probably refer to AS maps. But just if there's any dealers from Dubbo, let us know in the commo box.